The rain was not gentle. It was a cold, hard assault, each drop a tiny needle of ice against Elara's thin jacket. The fabric, already soaked through, offered no protection. It clung to her skin like a second, colder layer of misery. She huddled in the recessed doorway of a closed-down bakery, the smell of stale sugar and forgotten dreams clinging to the damp brick. Her body trembled, a constant, violent shudder that had started in her bones and now shook her entire frame. It wasn't just the cold. It was hunger, a gnawing, hollow ache in the pit of her stomach that had long since passed the point of noise. Now it was just a silent, heavy weight. Her world had shrunk to this single, wretched point. This alley, this rain, this unending cold. Everything was gone. The small apartment she'd once called a refuge, the meager savings she had scraped together, her paints, her canvases, her hope, all of it had been consumed by him, by Mark. He had taken her money, then her confidence, and when there was nothing left to take, he had simply left. He'd called her worthless, a parasite living off his generosity. The final act of his cruelty was tossing her art supplies into a dumpster, the colorful tubes of paint bursting like broken promises against a heap of garbage. He had aimed to break her spirit. He had nearly succeeded. Her fingers, numb and blue, were curled tightly around her last remaining treasure, a leather-bound sketchbook. Its corners were worn, the cover stained by rain and grime, but inside was the only thing she had left of herself. Inside were her drawings. Her breath hitched, a painful, shallow thing. A cough rattled in her chest, hot and sharp. She knew she was sick. The fever that had been simmering for days was now a raging fire behind her eyes, making the world swim and distort. The distant city lights blurred into long, weeping streaks of color. She leaned her head back against the cold brick, closing her eyes. It would be so easy to just stop, to let the cold take her, to let the shivering cease and the pain fade into a final, dreamless sleep. It was a tempting thought, a siren song of peace in a sea of suffering, but a flicker of something stubborn, something deep inside her, refused. It was the same spark that had made her pick up a pencil as a child, the same drive that had her sketching faces on napkins in diners she couldn't afford to eat in. It was the artist, the part of her Mark couldn't destroy. With a monumental effort, she forced her frozen fingers to open the sketchbook. The pages were damp, but the charcoal drawings were mostly intact. Faces stared back at her, born from her imagination and observation. The weary eyes of an old man on the bus, the joyous, uninhibited laugh of a child in the park, and her, the woman she drew over and over again. She didn't know her name. She had seen her only once, months ago, in a framed photograph on a desk in a fancy office building where she'd been cleaning bathrooms for a week before being let go. The woman had a smile that seemed to hold all the warmth in the world. Her eyes sparkled with a light that Elara felt she could almost capture, but never fully replicate. Drawing her had become an obsession, a way to connect with a beauty and grace that felt so absent from her own life. Her vision blurred again. The face in the sketchbook swam. The world tilted, a dizzying lurch. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were floating above her own pathetic, shivering body. A sound cut through the rhythmic drumming of the rain, the purr of a high-end engine, smooth and quiet. Headlights swept across the alley, blinding her for a moment. A long, black car glided to a stop at the curb just a few feet away. For a moment, she felt a spike of fear. An alley, a fancy car, a lone woman. It was a story that never ended well. She tried to make herself smaller, to melt into the shadows of the doorway. The car door opened. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, holding a large black umbrella that seemed to swallow the rain. He was dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armor. Even in the dim light, she could see it was expensive. Everything about him screamed power and wealth, the kind of man who lived in a different universe from hers. Damien Blackwood felt the weariness settle deep into his bones as his driver, Arthur, pulled the car to the curb. Another late night at the office, another day of sterile meetings, of billion-dollar decisions that felt utterly meaningless. The empire he had built, the one that had once filled him with pride, now felt like a gilded cage. Ever since Lily? He shook his head, pushing the thought away. It had been 2 years. 2 years. And the silence in his house was still deafening. The laughter was gone. The light in his children's eyes had dimmed. Mia, his little girl, barely spoke. Leo, his son, had retreated into a world of drawings, his own silent language of grief. Damien was a man who could solve any problem, conquer any market, bend the world to his will. But he couldn't fix the broken hearts of his own children. He couldn't fix his own. He stared out the window at the rain-slicked streets of the city. A city he owned a significant piece of, yet he felt like a ghost haunting its edges. "We're here, Mr. Blackwood." Arthur's voice was gentle, as always. Damien didn't move. His gaze had snagged on something in the shadows of a derelict bakery, a shape, a person, huddled and small, trying to be invisible. His first instinct, honed by years of living in a world of threats and opportunists, was caution. But then he saw the trembling, the violent, uncontrollable shaking. This wasn't a threat. This was desperation. "One moment, Arthur," he said, his voice low. He pushed the door open, the umbrella snapping into place above him. The cold air hit him, sharp and clean. He walked toward the doorway, his expensive leather shoes silent on the wet pavement. As he got closer, he saw it was a woman. She was young, maybe mid-20s, but she looked frail, her face pale and gaunt in the dim light. Her clothes were soaked, her hair plastered to her skull. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. And she was clutching a book, a sketchbook. It was open, even from a few feet away. In the poor light, the drawing on the page was astonishingly vivid. The charcoal was masterful, capturing not just a likeness, but an essence. His breath caught in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs, a painful, shocking rhythm. He knew that face. He knew that smile. He knew the exact way her eyes crinkled at the corners. It was Lily. His Lily. The world seemed to fall away. The sound of the rain, the chill in the air, the exhaustion in his bones. It all vanished. There was only the drawing. A perfect, soul-bearing rendition of his late wife. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. She flinched, pulling the book tighter to her chest, as if to protect it. His voice, when he finally found it, was rough with emotion, barely a whisper. "Where did you get that?" Elara stared up at the imposing figure. The question disoriented her. She thought he would tell her to move on, to get out of his sight. She expected anger or disgust. Not this raw, stunned emotion in his voice. She swallowed, her throat dry and painful. I drew it." He knelt, heedless of the filthy water soaking the knee of his $1,000 trousers. His eyes, dark and intense, were fixed on the drawing, then on her face. He saw the feverish glaze in her eyes, the blue tint of her lips. "Are you all right?" The question was gentle, a stark contrast to his powerful presence. The simple kindness in his tone was her undoing. The dam she had built against her own despair finally broke. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. "No," she whispered, the admission costing her the last of her strength. He reached out, not to take the book, but gesturing toward her. "Come with me." It wasn't a command. It was a plea, an offer. Fear warred with a desperate, burgeoning hope in her chest. Her instincts, trained by a life of hard knocks and betrayal, screamed at her to refuse, to stay in the shadows where she was miserable, but, in a way, safe. But then she looked into his eyes. She saw past the wealth and the power. She saw a pain that mirrored her own, a profound, soul-deep loneliness. And she saw the sketchbook in her hands, the drawing of the woman with the kind eyes. Something connected them, a thread of fate spun in charcoal and grief. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. They buckled beneath her. Before she could fall, he was there. He scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. One arm supported her back, the other her knees. The sketchbook was pressed between them. She was too weak to protest, too stunned to do anything but surrender to the sudden warmth of his body, the solid feel of his arms. He smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and something else, something like safety. He carried her to the car, his umbrella shielding them both. Arthur, the driver, leaped out and held the back door open, his face a mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of shock. Damien gently deposited her onto the plush leather seat. The interior of the car was warm and silent, a cocoon of impossible luxury. He slid in beside her, pulling a thick cashmere blanket from the seat pocket and draping it over her shivering form. The warmth was immediate, overwhelming. It seeped into her chilled limbs, making her teeth chatter even harder for a moment, before the shaking began to subside. "Arthur," Damien said, his voice regaining its command. "Home, and please call Dr. Evans. Tell him it's an emergency." "Right away, Mr. Blackwood." The car pulled away from the curb, gliding silently through the wet streets. Elara stared out the window at the alley she had just left, at the miserable little doorway that had nearly been her final resting place. It already seemed like a lifetime ago. She clutched the blanket, the soft wool a shocking comfort against her skin. She looked at the man beside her. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the sketchbook, which she still held tightly. Her voice was a fragile thread of sound. "I'm not a beggar, sir." He finally turned to look at her. His dark eyes were filled with an unreadable emotion. "I'm an artist," she finished, the words a defiant declaration of her own existence. A flicker of something, was it a sad smile, touched his lips. "I know," he said softly. "I can see that." Then his voice dropped, thick with a pain so profound it seemed to fill the small space. "The woman in your drawing, she was my wife." The words hung in the air between them as the car sped through the night, carrying her away from the ruins of her life and toward a future she could not possibly imagine. The house wasn't a house, it was a monument. It rose from the earth like a cathedral of glass and steel, perched on a hill overlooking the glittering expanse of the city. As the car swept up the long, private drive, Elara could only stare, her mind struggling to process the sheer scale of it. It was beautiful, but in a cold, intimidating way. It felt less like a home and more like a museum. Damien carried her inside. The interior was even more breathtaking. A two-story foyer with a marble floor so polished it reflected the minimalist chandelier like a dark, still lake. But the air was silent, still, and cool. A grand staircase swept upward into the shadows. There was no clutter, no sign of life. It was a space of immense wealth and immense emptiness. Elara felt a fresh wave of anxiety. She didn't belong here. She was a stray, covered in the filth of the streets, being brought into this pristine sanctuary. She was a stain. The thought made her want to shrink, to disappear. "It's all right." Damien's voice was a low rumble near her ear. He must have felt her tense up. He carried her past the grand staircase and into a smaller, cozier room. A library lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A fire was already laid in the hearth, unlit. He gently set her down on a deep leather sofa that swallowed her whole. "A doctor is on his way," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Can I get you anything? Water? Something to eat?" The mention of food made her stomach clench with a painful, desperate cramp. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days, but shame was a powerful force. "I don't want to be a bother." "It's not a bother," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He left the room, and she heard his quiet voice on the phone in the hall, presumably speaking to his household staff. Left alone, Elara pulled the cashmere blanket tighter around herself. She looked around the library. Thousands of books, all neatly arranged, a large, imposing desk at one end, and on that desk, in a simple silver frame, was the photograph from the office building. It was her, Lily, the woman from her drawings. Her smile was just as warm in person, or in photo. She was standing next to Damien, her head resting on his shoulder. They both looked so happy, so full of life. It was a picture of a perfect love. A soft sound from the doorway made her jump. A woman in a simple, neat uniform stood there, holding a tray. She was older, with kind eyes and a gentle face. She placed the tray on the coffee table in front of Elara. On it was a bowl of steaming soup, a glass of water, and a small plate of bread. "Mr. Blackwood thought you might like this," the woman said softly. "My name is Maria. I'm the housekeeper." "Thank you," Elara whispered. Maria gave her a small, reassuring smile and then retreated, leaving her alone once more. Elara stared at the soup. It smelled like heaven. Her hands trembled as she picked up the spoon. The first sip was pure agony and ecstasy. It was hot and savory, and it felt like life itself flowing back into her. She ate slowly, deliberately, forcing herself not to devour it like a wild animal. Each spoonful was a confirmation that this was real. She was safe, she was warm, she was eating. By the time she finished, a man in a suit carrying a medical bag had arrived. Dr. Evans was calm and professional. He took her temperature, listened to her chest, and asked gentle questions. He diagnosed a nasty case of pneumonia, complicated by malnutrition and exhaustion. "She needs rest, antibiotics, and regular meals," he told Damien, who had returned to the room. "She's been running on empty for a very long time." Damien just nodded, his expression grim. After the doctor left, Damien turned to her. "Maria has prepared a room for you. You can stay here as long as you need to get back on your feet." I can't," she stammered, overwhelmed. "This is too much. I have nothing. I can't pay you back." "You don't need to pay me back," he said, his gaze dropping to the sketchbook she had placed on the sofa beside her. "You brought my wife's smile back into this house. Consider us even." His words silenced her protests. Maria led her upstairs to a guest room that was larger than her entire old apartment. It had a bed with a mountain of pillows, an adjoining bathroom stocked with fluffy towels, and a window that looked out over the glittering city. It was a fairy tale. Lying in that impossibly soft bed, clean from a hot shower and dressed in a set of borrowed pajamas that felt like silk, Elara finally allowed herself to believe it was real. But as she drifted off to sleep, a new fear took hold. This was temporary, a beautiful dream from which she would inevitably wake up. The next morning she woke to the sound of silence, a deep, restful quiet she hadn't experienced in years. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting a golden rectangle on the plush carpet. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The alley, the rain, the man with sad eyes. She felt better. The fever had lessened, the ache in her bones was duller, the antibiotics were working. She found a set of simple, clean clothes, soft gray sweatpants and a sweater, laid out for her. They were obviously new. Hesitantly, she made her way downstairs, following the distant, faint sound of voices. She found her way to a bright, airy kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Damien was there, dressed not in a suit, but in casual trousers and a sweater. He was trying to coax a little girl, who couldn't be more than 6, to eat her cereal. "Just 3 more bites, Mia," he was saying, his voice gentle. The little girl shook her head, her dark curls bouncing. She had her mother's eyes. Her lips were set in a stubborn little line. Sitting opposite her was a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. He was quietly sketching in a notebook, occasionally glancing at his sister with worried eyes. This was the heart of the house. This was the life that was missing from the grand, silent foyer. They all looked up as Elara hesitated in the doorway. Damien's face softened. The boy, Leo, looked at her with open curiosity. But the little girl, Mia, stared at her with an unnerving intensity, her gaze guarded and suspicious. Elara felt like an intruder all over again. "Good morning," Damien said, standing up. "This is my son, Leo, and my daughter, Mia. Kids, this is Elara. She's going to be staying with us for a little while." Leo gave a small, shy wave. Mia said nothing. She just stared, her spoon frozen halfway to her bowl. "Hello," Elara said softly, her voice still hoarse. An awkward silence fell. Elara felt Mia's stare like a physical weight. The little girl was the gatekeeper of this fragile family, and Elara had not been granted entry. Over the next few days, a quiet routine formed. Elara spent most of her time in her room, resting and regaining her strength. Maria brought her meals on a tray, always with a kind word. Elara sketched in her book, drawing the view from her window, the play of light on the furniture. But she couldn't bring herself to draw faces. It felt too intimate. She saw the children in passing. Leo would sometimes watch her from a distance, his own sketchbook clutched in his hands. He was curious, but cautious. Mia, however, was actively hostile. If Elara entered a room, Mia would leave. If Elara tried to smile at her, Mia would turn away. She was a tiny fortress of grief, and her walls were high. Elara understood. She was a stranger in their mother's home, a stranger brought in by their father. In the child's mind, what could she be but a threat? She never pushed. She kept her distance, spoke softly when spoken to, and tried to remain as invisible as possible. She knew she was a guest on borrowed time, and she was terrified of overstaying her welcome. One afternoon, she was in the library, the quietest room in the house. She was looking at the photo of Lily again, trying to understand the woman she had drawn from memory. She heard a small sound and turned to see Mia standing in the doorway, clutching a worn, one-eyed teddy bear. The little girl was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Elara's heart ached. She knelt down slowly, so she wouldn't seem threatening. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. Mia held up the bear. Its arm was hanging by a single thread. "Bun is broken," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. "He's all broken." Elara looked at the beloved toy. "He's not all broken," she said softly. I think maybe I can fix him." Mia looked at her with suspicion, but the tears kept coming. She was too distraught to maintain her defenses. She took a hesitant step forward and held out the bear. "Maria keeps a sewing kit in the kitchen drawer," Elara said. "Will you come with me and show me which one?" Mia hesitated for a long moment, then gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Together they went to the kitchen. Mia pointed out the drawer. Elara found a needle and a thread that matched the bear's brown fur. She sat at the large kitchen table, and Mia climbed onto the chair opposite her, watching her every move with those big, serious eyes. Elara didn't talk, she just worked. Her fingers, now steady and warm, were deft and careful. She stitched the bear's arm back on, her movements precise and gentle. She reinforced the seam, then noticed the bear's loose eye. She carefully tightened the thread, holding it in place. She found a small hole near its leg, and mended that too, with tiny, almost invisible stitches. It was quiet, focused work. The only sound was the gentle ticking of a clock on the wall. For the first time, Elara felt like she was contributing something, not just taking. She wasn't just a patient, a charity case. She was an artist, and her hands knew how to create, how to mend. When she was finished, she held out the bear. "There," she said softly, "good as new." Mia took the bear, her small fingers tracing the new stitches. She looked at the reattached arm, the secure eye. She hugged the bear tightly to her chest. Then she looked up at Elara. The suspicion in her eyes was gone. In its place was a fragile glimmer of something else. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the first time the little girl had spoken to her directly and voluntarily. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Later that evening, as Elara was heading back to her room, she found a piece of paper slipped under her door. She picked it up. It was a drawing, done in crayon, with the charming imprecision of a child's hand. It depicted a stick figure with wild brown hair, smiling. Next to it was another stick figure with blonde hair, also smiling. Above them, a giant, radiant sun. She knew instantly who had drawn it. Leo. It was his way of saying hello, his way of saying, "I see you." She slid down to the floor, leaning against the door, and held the drawing to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a very long time, they weren't tears of sorrow or despair. They were tears of gratitude. A teddy bear mended with careful stitches, a child's drawing of a smiling sun. They were the first bricks in the foundation of a home she never knew she was building. The first quiet signs that maybe, just maybe, she could belong here. The house had rhythms Elara was slowly learning. The early morning rush as Damien got the children ready for school. The deep, humming silence of the midday, when it was just her and Maria, moving in separate, respectful orbits. The afternoon return of the children, bringing a brief flurry of noise and energy. And then, the night. The night was when the silence returned, but it was a different kind. Heavier. More profound. It was a silence filled with ghosts and unspoken grief. Elara often found she couldn't sleep. Her body was healing, but her mind was still a battlefield of anxious thoughts and lingering fears. She would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. One night, a week after she had fixed Mia's bear, thirst drove her from her room. She padded silently down the grand staircase, her bare feet cold on the marble floor. The house was dark, save for a single soft light emanating from the kitchen. She pushed the door open gently. Damien was there, sitting at the enormous kitchen island, a glass of water untouched in front of him. He was staring out the large window at the distant, glittering city lights, but his focus was clearly inward. He looked as lost and lonely as she felt. He heard her and turned, his expression startled for a moment before it softened. "I'm sorry. Did I wake you?" "No," she said, her voice a little more than a whisper. "I couldn't sleep either." She moved to the cabinet, poured herself a glass of water, her movements quiet and tentative. The space between them felt charged with all the things they hadn't said. "This house gets loud when it's quiet," he said, breaking the silence. It was a strange statement, but she understood it perfectly. "Yes," she agreed, taking a seat at the far end of the island, maintaining a respectful distance. "It does." They sat in a comfortable quiet for a few moments, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator. "Thank you," he said suddenly, looking at her directly, "for what you did for Mia, with her bear." Elara felt a flush of warmth. "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," he insisted, his voice low and serious. "She hasn't let that bear out of her sight since her mother, since Lily passed. She talks to it, tells it things she won't tell me. When she saw it was broken, she was heartbroken. You didn't just fix a toy, Elara. You fixed a piece of her." The way he said her name, so naturally, so gently, sent a small shiver through her. "She's been through a lot," Elara said softly. "They both have." Damien sighed, a heavy, weary sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He ran a hand over his face. "I don't know what I'm doing. I can run a multinational corporation. I can negotiate deals worth billions. But I can't seem to reach my own children. Leo draws his feelings. Mia hides hers. I'm just fumbling in the dark." It was a confession of vulnerability so raw, so unexpected from this powerful, competent man, that it cracked open something in Elara's own chest. Here, in the quiet of the night, he wasn't the billionaire CEO. He was just a father, a grieving husband. "You're not," she found herself saying, her voice gaining a surprising strength. "You're here. You're trying. That's not fumbling. That's everything." He looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, aching sadness. Lily was the heart of this family. She was the light, the laughter. She knew how to fix everything with a hug and a story. When she died, she took the instruction manual with her. He finally took a sip of his water, his gaze distant again. The cancer was fast, aggressive. One day she was fine. The next, we were counting days. I threw money at it. The best doctors, the best treatments. It didn't matter. All my power, all my wealth, and I couldn't save the one person who mattered most. His pain was a tangible thing in the room. Elara felt her own heart ache in sympathy. She knew what it was like to be powerless. Without thinking, she found herself speaking, the words spilling out of her in a quiet, halting rush. "He used to tell me my art was worthless." Damien's focus snapped back to her. "He? My ex-boyfriend, Mark. Saying his name felt like swallowing glass. He said I was a dreamer, a child, that no one would ever pay for my scribbles. He said I was lucky to have him because no one else would want someone so useless. She stared down at her hands, twisting her fingers in her lap. The worst part is I started to believe him. He had this way of chipping away at you, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. When I finally found the courage to leave, he made sure I had nothing. He destroyed my portfolio, broke my canvases. He wanted to erase me. She took a shaky breath. That's why I draw her, she whispered, nodding toward the general direction of the library. Your wife. I saw her picture and she looked so full of light, the exact opposite of how I felt. Drawing her felt like trying to remember what the sun felt like. A profound silence settled over them. They were two strangers from two completely different worlds who had just laid their deepest wounds bare on a kitchen island in the middle of the night. His was a wound of loss. Hers was a wound of destruction. But they were both wounds of the heart. Damien slowly pushed his glass away. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw no pity in his eyes, only a deep, resonant understanding. He was wrong, Damien said, his voice firm, resolute. The man who told you that, he was a fool. Your art, the way you captured Lily, it's not worthless. It's a gift. You don't just see people, Elara, you see their souls. Her breath hitched. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Mark had called her a parasite. Damien was calling her a gift. I spent 2 years trying to describe Lily's light to my children, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. Trying to make them remember it. And you, a stranger, captured it on a piece of paper in a dark alley with a piece of charcoal. He stood up and walked over to the window, his back to her. This house has been a beautiful, empty shell since she's been gone. The day I brought you here, it was the first time in 2 years I felt like I had done something right for this family. Something she would have done. The confession hung in the air, heavy and beautiful. Elara felt tears prick her eyes again, but she blinked them back. She was tired of crying. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something else, a flicker of strength, of purpose. She had been brought here by a drawing of a ghost. But maybe, just maybe, she was meant to be here for the living, for the sad, kind man who was trying to hold his world together, for the quiet boy who spoke through his drawings, and for the little girl who had lost her mother and was afraid of letting anyone else in. That night, when Elara went back to bed, she slept without dreaming. It was a deep, healing sleep. The ghosts in the quiet house seemed to have quieted too. They had shared their wounds, and in the shared space of their pain, a fragile, tentative bond had been forged. It was no longer just a bond of gratitude and pity. It was a bond of mutual understanding, a bond of shared humanity. A new kind of dawn was breaking, not just outside the window, but inside the walls of the silent, waiting house. Life began to find a new, gentle rhythm. Elara started, joining the family for breakfast every morning. The conversations were small, simple. Leo would show her his latest drawing, a spaceship, a dragon, a portrait of their dog, Buster. Mia, while still reserved, no longer fled when Elara entered a room. She would even occasionally answer a direct question with a word or two, always while clutching the mended bun-bun. Damien had a new light in his eyes. He started coming home from work earlier. He smiled more, a real smile that reached his eyes. He bought Elara a complete professional set of art supplies, charcoals, pencils, pastels, and a stack of high-quality paper. "I'm not a charity case," she had protested, overwhelmed by the generosity. "It's not charity," he had countered gently. "It's an investment. I want to see what else you can create." So she drew. She filled the pages with the life that was slowly returning to the house. She drew Buster sleeping in a patch of sun. She drew Maria arranging flowers in a vase. She drew Leo, his face a mask of concentration as he built a complex Lego tower. She even drew Mia, a quick, candid sketch of her whispering a secret into Bun Bun's ear. She was healing. The house was healing. It was a fragile piece, a delicate bubble of happiness, and Elara found herself praying it would never pop. But the past rarely stays buried. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, not with a bang, but with the shrill, intrusive ring of Elara's cheap, pay-as-you-go phone. A phone Damien had insisted she get. She rarely used it. No one ever called her. She was in the garden, sketching the roses, when it rang. The name on the screen made her blood run cold. Mark. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her hands started to tremble, the pencil dropping from her numb fingers. How did he get this number? Why was he calling her now? For a moment, she thought about ignoring it, about throwing the phone into the bushes and pretending it never happened. But she knew Mark. He wouldn't give up. With a shaking hand, she answered, "What do you want?" His voice was just as she remembered it, smooth, confident, with an undercurrent of venom. "Well, well, Elara, you sound surprised to hear from me. I have to say, I'm surprised myself. Last I saw you, you were street trash. Now? The internet tells me you're shacked up with Damien Blackwood, the billionaire. You always did know how to land on your feet, you little parasite." "How did you find me?" she whispered, her throat closing up. "A little society blog," he sneered. "A blurry photo of Blackwood at some charity thing. And who's that in the background, looking all clean and healthy? My little runaway artist. You clean up nice, I'll give you that." Panic seized her, a cold, suffocating dread. She was going to ruin everything for Damien. This was her fault. "Leave me alone, Mark." He laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "Oh, I don't think so. See, you and I have some unfinished business, and I think your new boyfriend would be very interested to hear all about your past, about how you were living in an alley, how pathetic you were. Bad for his image, don't you think? A titan of industry taking in a homeless vagrant? The tabloids would have a field day." The threat was clear. Blackmail. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat with defeat. $100,000, he said, the number sounding obscene. "A small price to pay for my silence, a finder's fee for letting you go. Wire it to my account by Friday, or the whole world gets to know Damien Blackwood's dirty little secret." He gave her the account details and hung up. Elara stood frozen in the garden, the phone slipping from her hand and falling silently onto the grass. The roses blurred before her eyes. The sun felt cold. The beautiful, safe world she had started to build was crumbling around her. She couldn't do it. She couldn't let her past poison this family. She couldn't let Mark's filth touch Damien, or Leo, or Mia. He had called her a parasite, and now she was proving him right, bringing her problems, her darkness, into their light. There was only one thing to do. She had to disappear. Again. That night, she didn't go down for dinner. She pleaded a headache. Her mind was racing, a frantic swirl of fear and desperation. She couldn't ask Damien for the money. It would prove she was only with him for what he could provide. It would validate every terrible thing Mark had ever said about her. She had to run. It was the only way to protect them. After the house had fallen into its deep, nightly silence, she packed. There wasn't much to take. The clothes Damien had bought her felt wrong to pack, like stolen goods. She put on the same worn jeans and thin jacket she had arrived in, which Maria had washed and folded for her. She took only one thing that had been given to her, the sketchbook filled with her new drawings, and the single crayon drawing from Leo, which she tucked carefully into its pages. Her last act was to write a note. Her hands shook so badly the letters were jagged and uneven. Dear Damien, thank you for everything, for your kindness, for your generosity, for giving me a place to heal. I will never be able to repay you. I am so sorry, but I have to leave. My past is catching up with me, and I cannot let it harm you or your beautiful children. Please, do not look for me. This is for the best. You gave me back my life. Now I have to go live it on my own. Thank you for showing me what the sun felt like again. Elara. She left the note on the pillow of the fairy tale bed. She took one last look around the beautiful room, a painful lump forming in her throat. She crept down the stairs, each step a silent agony. She was halfway across the cavernous foyer, her hand reaching for the massive front door, when the lights flashed on. Going somewhere? Damien stood at the bottom of the staircase. He wasn't wearing pajamas. He was fully dressed in dark trousers and a black sweater, as if he had been waiting for her. In his hand was her phone. Her heart stopped. He knew. I was just getting some air, she lied, her voice trembling. He walked toward her slowly, his expression unreadable but intense. Your phone was in the garden. It has a voice recording function. It activates automatically for unknown numbers. A security feature. He held up the phone. I heard the whole conversation, Elara. Her facade crumbled. Sobs she had been holding back erupted, raw and desperate. I'm so sorry, she cried, covering her face with her hands. I was going to leave. I wasn't going to let him hurt you. I swear. She expected anger. She expected him to tell her to get out, to confirm that she was nothing but trouble. Instead, he did something that shocked her to her core. He closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. He just held her. His arms were strong and steady around her, a solid wall against the storm that was raging inside her. She wept into his sweater, all the fear and shame and terror pouring out of her. Shh, he murmured, his hand stroking her hair. It's okay. You're okay. You're not going anywhere. After a long time, her sobs subsided into shaky breaths. He gently pulled back, his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Did you really think I would let you go? He asked, his voice low and fierce. Did you think I would let that piece of filth chase you away? He'll tell everyone, she whispered. He'll ruin your reputation. A dark, dangerous fire lit in Damien's eyes. It was a look she had never seen before. It was the look of the titan of industry, the predator, the man who did not lose. Let him try, he said, his voice dropping to a near growl. He thinks he's blackmailing some socialite. He has no idea who he's dealing with. He's not threatening my reputation, Elara. He's threatening my family. My family. The words echoed in the vast, silent foyer. You are not a problem to be solved, Damien said, his gaze unwavering. You are not a secret to be hidden. You are a part of this house now. You are a part of our lives. Leo and Mia, they are finally starting to smile again. Because of you. Do you think I would let anyone take that away? He took a deep breath, his expression shifting from fierce protection to something softer, more vulnerable. Do you trust me, Elara? She looked into his eyes, and she saw the man who had pulled her from the rain. The man who had confessed his loneliness in the middle of the night. The man who called her art a gift. Yes, she whispered. The answer absolute. Good, he said, a grim smile touching his lips. Then go upstairs, get some sleep. I'll handle this. It was a dismissal, but it was also a promise, a declaration of loyalty so profound it left her breathless. He was choosing her, publicly, decisively. He was standing between her and the monster from her past. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She walked back up the stairs, leaving her protection in his capable hands. For the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting alone. The protector had made his stand. The next day was unnervingly quiet. Damien left early, dressed in one of his formidable business suits, his jaw set with a grim determination. He simply kissed the top of Mia's head, ruffled Leo's hair, and gave Elara a long, meaningful look before he left. Don't worry, he'd said. That was all. Elara spent the day in a state of suspended anxiety. Every time the phone rang, she jumped. She tried to draw, but her hands were unsteady. She felt like a spectator in her own life, waiting for a verdict to be read. The children seemed to sense her unease. Leo stayed close by, quietly drawing beside her, while Mia brought Bun Bun over and sat him on Elara's lap, as if the mended bear could offer some comfort. Damien didn't use his wealth for violence or revenge. He used it as it was intended to be used, as a tool of overwhelming, decisive power. Mark was sitting in his dingy apartment, feeling smug. He'd checked his bank account a dozen times. The money wasn't there yet, but it would be. He knew Elara. She was weak. She'd be terrified of her rich boyfriend finding out what she really was. A sharp knock on his door made him jump. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened it to find two men in severe, dark suits. They didn't look like cops. They looked like lawyers, very expensive lawyers. "Mark Peterson?" the taller one asked, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Yeah? Who's asking?" The man handed him a thick envelope. "You've been served. This is a restraining order, effective immediately. You are to have no contact, direct or indirect, with Ms. Elara Vance or Mr. Damien Blackwood. Any attempt to do so will result in your immediate arrest." Mark stared at the papers, dumbfounded. "Furthermore," the second man chimed in, holding a tablet, "our investigators have compiled a comprehensive file on your activities, including 3 separate instances of financial fraud against former partners, a documented history of harassment, and the illegal eviction and destruction of private property belonging to Ms. Vance. We have testimony from 2 other women you've extorted. Criminal charges are being filed this afternoon. You might want to retain a lawyer, though I doubt you can afford one of our caliber." The first man leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a cold, precise whisper. "Mr. Blackwood wants you to understand something. This is not a negotiation. This is a consequence. If you ever so much as type Elara Vance's name into a search engine again, he will bring the full weight of his resources down upon you. You will not just be poor. You will be destitute. You will not just be disgraced. You will be erased. Do you understand?" Mark's smugness evaporated, replaced by a cold, primal fear. He had tried to blackmail a king, and the king had responded not by paying the ransom, but by burning his little village to the ground. He could only nod, his mouth dry. The men turned and left as silently as they had arrived. Mark was left standing in his doorway, holding the papers that signaled the complete and utter demolition of his life. He had underestimated his opponent. He had underestimated Elara. He had lost. When Damien came home that evening, he looked tired, but calm. He found Elara in the library, pacing nervously. "It's over," he said simply. She stopped, searching his face. "What did you do?" "I made a problem go away," he said. "Legally, permanently. You will never hear from him again. He no longer has the power to harm you or anyone else." Relief washed over Elara so powerfully, her knees felt weak. She sank into a chair, the tension of the last 24 hours draining out of her. It was really over. The ghost that had haunted her for so long had been exorcised. She was, finally and truly, free. She looked up at Damien, who was watching her with a soft expression. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. "There's nothing to thank me for," he said, walking over to her. He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. They were warm and steady. "I told you, he was threatening my family." The days that followed were filled with a new kind of peace. The fragile bubble of happiness had been tested, and it hadn't popped. It had solidified. Elara no longer felt like a guest. She felt like she was home. She laughed more freely. She started painting again, setting up an easel in a sunlit corner of the house. Color returned to her world, both on the canvas and in her life. The children blossomed. Leo's drawings became more vibrant, filled with happy people. And Mia started talking, not just in whispers, but in full sentences. One afternoon, she climbed into Elara's lap while she was reading and fell asleep, her small head resting on Elara's chest. It was an act of complete and total trust, and it made Elara's heart feel full to bursting. One perfect Saturday afternoon, the family was in the garden. Damien was pushing Mia on the swing, her laughter echoing in the warm air. Leo and Elara were sitting on a blanket on the grass, having a drawing contest. "I win," Leo declared, holding up a picture of a fearsome, rainbow-colored dinosaur. "I don't know," Elara said with a playful smile, holding up her sketch of him, his face scrunched in concentration. "I think mine is pretty good." Damien stopped pushing the swing and came over to them, Mia trailing behind him. He looked down at the drawings, then at Elara, a look of profound love and contentment on his face. "We need to make this official," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Elara looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. "Official?" He sat down on the blanket, taking her free hand. His expression was serious, hopeful, and a little nervous. "Elara Vance," he began, his voice husky. "You came into my life like a storm and washed it clean. You brought the light back into this house. You gave my children back their laughter. You taught me how to feel again. I don't want to spend another day without you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elara gasped. "I'm not just offering you a sanctuary anymore," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm offering you my heart, my life, my name." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a single, perfect diamond that shone like a captured star. Before Elara could even find her breath to answer, a small voice piped up. "Are you asking her to be our new mommy?" Mia asked, her eyes wide with hope. Damien looked at his daughter, then back at Elara, a smile breaking across his face. "Yes, sweetie, I am." "Then you have to do it right, Daddy," Leo said, with all the seriousness an 8-year-old could muster. "You have to get on your knee." Damien chuckled, a deep, happy sound. He shifted from sitting to kneeling on the grass in front of her. The billionaire CEO kneeling on a blanket surrounded by his children, asking a once broken artist to complete their family. "Elara," he said again, his eyes locked on hers, "will you marry me? Will you be my wife and a mother to these crazy kids? Will you make our family whole?" Tears streamed down Elara's face, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked from Damien's hopeful face to Leo's earnest expression, to Mia's shining, expectant eyes. This was it. This was the end of one story and the beginning of a magnificent new one. This was not a dream. This was real. This was home. "Yes," she breathed, the word a joyful sob. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." Damien's face broke into a radiant smile as he slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. Leo whooped with joy, and Mia launched herself forward, wrapping her small arms around Elara's neck in a fierce hug. "Mommy," she whispered into her ear. Damien joined the hug, his strong arms encircling all of them, pulling them into a tight, warm circle of love. Elara, pressed between the man who had saved her and the children who had healed her, closed her eyes and knew, with every fiber of her being, that she was no longer broken. She was whole. The wedding was not a grand affair. It was not a society event for the papers. It was held right there, in the garden where he had proposed, the place that had witnessed their new beginning. The guest list was small. Maria, the kind housekeeper who had been a silent guardian. Arthur, the stoic driver who had been the first witness to their story, and a few of Damien's closest, most trusted friends who had seen his grief and now celebrated his joy. Elara wore a simple, elegant ivory dress. She didn't need a designer gown or a flashy spectacle. Her happiness was the most beautiful thing she could ever wear. In her hands, she didn't carry an elaborate bouquet of expensive flowers. She held a small, simple posy of the very same roses she had been sketching in the garden on the day her past had tried and failed to reclaim her. Leo was the ring-bearer, marching down the grassy aisle with a solemn importance that was both adorable and hilarious. He carried a small satin pillow, upon which rested the simple gold bands that would bind their lives together. Mia was the flower girl. She walked ahead of Elara, her basket filled not with rose petals, but with a colorful mix of wildflowers she had picked herself that morning. And tucked into the crook of her other arm, dressed in a tiny handmade tuxedo jacket that Elara had sewn for him, was Bunbun. The one-eyed bear was a guest of honor. When Elara reached the small, flower-adorned arch where Damien was waiting, he looked at her as if he were seeing the sun for the first time. The love in his eyes was a physical force, a warmth that enveloped her completely. They exchanged their vows, simple words of promise that held the weight of everything they had been through. Damien promised to always be her protector, her partner, and her home. Elara promised to always fill his life with color, to be his comfort, and to love his children as her own. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Damien didn't kiss her immediately. He turned, and he and Elara both knelt down. They looked at Leo and Mia. "Is it okay if I kiss her now?" Damien asked them, his voice full of gentle humor. Leo gave a thumbs up. Mia giggled and shouted, "Yes!" And so he kissed her, A soft, tender kiss filled with the promise of 1,000 happy tomorrows. It wasn't a kiss for an audience. It was a kiss for their family. Later, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, the small party celebrated. There was no loud band, just soft music playing from a small speaker. There was no towering cake, but a table filled with everyone's favorite desserts. Elara found herself standing by the rose bushes, watching her family. Her husband. Damien was laughing, a deep, genuine sound, as he engaged in a thumb war with Leo. Her daughter. Mia was showing Maria the intricate details of Bun Bun's wedding attire. She felt a tug on her dress. She looked down to see Leo holding up his sketchbook. "I made you something," he said. He showed her the page. It was a new drawing, a family portrait. There was Damien, tall and smiling. There was Leo himself, holding his own sketchbook. There was Mia, holding Bun Bun. And there was Elara, standing right beside Damien, her hand in his. She was wearing her wedding dress and holding her roses. Above them all, just like in his very first drawing to her, was a giant, radiant sun, its rays touching each of them. But this time, inside the sun, he had drawn a faint, smiling face with kind eyes. Lily. Not as a ghost of the past, but as a benevolent, watchful spirit, blessing the family she had started and the woman who had helped to make it whole again. Elara's heart swelled with an emotion so powerful, it almost hurt. She pulled Leo into a hug, burying her face in his hair. "It's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she whispered. Damien walked over, wrapping his arms around both of them, Mia quickly joining the group hug. They stood there for a long moment, a complete circle, bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. Elara looked from the faces of the children she now called her own to the face of the man she loved more than life itself. She thought of the cold, rainy alley, of the hollow ache of hunger and despair. It felt like another lifetime, a story that had happened to someone else. She had been shattered, a collection of broken pieces left in the dark. But Damien had found her. He had seen the value in her brokenness, and together, with the innocent and powerful love of two small children, they had taken those pieces and built something new, something stronger, something beautiful. Because sometimes the most beautiful things are not the ones that were never broken, but the ones that were put back together with love.